Maya Brooks stood in the corner of the training hall and watched the other cadets prepare for their final assessment. She had been at the Galactic Naval Academy for 3 years now, and every single day had been a test of patience. The academy was located on a massive space station called Kepler-7 that orbited a distant star far from Earth. Thousands of cadets from dozens of different alien species trained here to become officers in the galactic fleet. Maya was the only human in her graduating class. The Zenthari cadets were gathering near the simulation pods, and their crystalline bodies caught the light in strange ways that made them look like walking prisms. They were tall and proud, and they never missed a chance to remind Maya that humans were barely qualified to be here. Commander Vrel was supervising the preparations in his violet crystal formations. Along his shoulders seemed to glow, brighter whenever he looked at Maya with obvious displeasure in his alien eyes. Drix approached from the other side of the hall, and his reptilian features were twisted in something that might have been disgust. He was a Corvan, and his people were famous throughout the galaxy as warriors who had been fighting wars for 3,000 years. Drix had been ranked first in the class until a training accident 2 months ago dropped him to 3rd place. Being assigned to work with a human for the final assessment was clearly something he considered an insult to his honor and his pride. Maya had learned not to react to the hostility anymore. In the beginning, she had tried to prove herself and tried to show them she belonged here. But every achievement was dismissed as luck, and every failure was held up as proof that humans did not deserve to be among the stars. So she had stopped trying to convince them and focused instead on surviving. Each day and learning everything she could, the final assessment was supposed to test everything they had learned. Over 3 years of training, cadets would enter simulation pods and face combat scenarios against various threats that existed in the galaxy. How well they performed would determine what kind of ship they would be assigned to after graduation. The best warriors got positions on capital ships that led fleets into battle. The worst got assigned to cargo transports or mining stations far from any action. Drix walked right up to Maya and looked down at her with his yellow reptilian eyes that had vertical slits for pupils. His tail was lashing back and forth behind him in a way that meant he was angry or agitated. Maya knew enough about Corvan body language by now to read the signs. She met his gaze without flinching and waited for him to speak first. "Try not to get in my way." "Earthborn," Drix said, and his voice had a hissing quality that made every word sound like a threat. "I will not let your weakness affect my score. You will follow my orders and stay behind me where you cannot cause problems." Maya simply nodded because arguing would not change anything. She had 3 years of experience dealing with aliens who thought she was inferior. The best response was to let her actions speak louder than any words could. Drix seemed disappointed that she did not argue back, and he turned away with a snort of contempt. The observation deck above, the training hall, was filling with instructors and senior cadets who wanted to watch the assessments. Maya could see them through the transparent panels that separated the 2 levels. Among them was Lieutenant Kale, who was a Vexian instructor, known for his tactical brilliance. The Vexians had multiple eyes arranged around their heads that let them see in almost every direction at once. Kyle was one of the few instructors who had never treated Maya with open contempt, and sometimes she caught him watching her with what seemed like curiosity rather than dismissal. Commander Vrel called for attention, and the entire hall fell silent. He explained the rules of the assessment in his cold, precise voice that echoed off the metal walls. Each pair of cadets would face 3 scenarios of increasing difficulty. Performance would be measured on objectives completed and casualties avoided and tactical decisions made. The scenarios were generated by advanced combat computers that had data from thousands of real battles. Maya and Drix were assigned to Pod 7. They walked to it in silence and climbed inside the cramped space that would be their world for the next several hours. The pod sealed behind them with a hiss of pressurizing air. Simulation suits were hanging on the walls, and they helped each other put them on because the suits were too complex to manage alone. The suits would track their movements and simulate damage if they were hit during the scenarios. The first scenario loaded, and Maya felt the familiar sensation of the simulation taking over her senses. Suddenly, they were standing on the deck of a damaged cargo ship. Alarms were blaring and red emergency lights were flashing. The computer voice announced that pirates were boarding, and their objective was to repel the attackers and secure the cargo. Old Drix immediately charged toward the sound of weapons fire without waiting to assess the situation. Maya took 3 seconds to look around and identify the layout of the ship. She spotted emergency stations and noted where the cargo hold entrances were located. Then she followed Drix, but she moved more carefully and used the walls for cover. The pirates were simulated members of a species called the Yaltor, who were known for hit-and-run tactics. They were fast and aggressive, but not particularly well coordinated. Drix was firing his weapon wildly and shouting Corvin battle cries that probably sounded impressive to him, but did nothing to help the situation. Within 2 minutes, he was surrounded by 3 pirates and taking heavy simulated fire. Maya moved along the outer corridor and came up behind the pirates from an angle they were not expecting. She fired in short controlled bursts the way she had been taught and dropped 2 of them before they realized she was there. The third one turned to face her, but Drix managed to hit it from his position. They cleared the first wave, but Drix had already taken significant simulated damage. The second wave came faster, and there were more of them this time. Drix wanted to hold their current position, but Maya could see it was a bad choice. The pirates could surround them too easily here. She pointed to a narrower corridor that would force the pirates to come at them from only one direction. Drix hesitated, and his pride clearly did not want to take suggestions from a human. But the tactical advantage was too obvious to ignore, and he reluctantly agreed. They fell back to the corridor and set up a defensive position. This time when the pirates came, Maya and Drix worked together better. Drix provided heavy suppressing fire while Maya picked off targets with precise shots. They held the position for 8 minutes until the simulation declared the ship secure. The computer announced they had completed the objective with acceptable performance. Drix said nothing when the simulation ended, but Maya noticed his tail had stopped lashing quite so violently. Maybe he was starting to realize she was not completely useless, or maybe he was just tired. Either way, it was a small improvement over the open hostility from before. They had 15 minutes to rest before the second scenario would begin. Maya drank some water and checked her suit systems. She could hear the observers talking through the pod's communication system. Some of them sounded surprised that the human had not failed immediately. Others were saying it was obviously Drix carrying the team. Lieutenant Kale's voice cut through the chatter and pointed out that Maya's positioning had been excellent and her accuracy was well above average. Commander Vrel dismissed the observation and said one lucky scenario proved nothing. The second scenario loaded, and this time they were in a colony settlement under attack. The second scenario dropped them into chaos and there was no time to plan. Maya and Drix materialized in the middle of a colony settlement that was burning and falling apart around them. The computer announced they were facing Kryn raiders who were attacking the civilian population. The objective was to evacuate as many civilians as possible, while holding off the attackers. The Kryn were infamous throughout the galaxy for their brutality and their tendency to take no prisoners. Drix immediately started shouting orders at the simulated civilians who were running, in panic through the streets. He wanted them to form organized groups, but his aggressive Corvin approach was making them more afraid, rather than calmer. Maya moved among the civilians more quietly and spoke to them in a steady voice that cut through their panic. She directed them toward the evacuation points that the scenario had designated as safe zones. The Kryn came in fast like the simulation had promised they would. They were bipedal creatures with thick armor plating and heavy weapons that could tear through walls. Drix engaged them directly with the kind of frontal assault that Corvin warriors were famous for. He was brave and fierce, but he was also getting surrounded again. Maya found a position on top of a partially collapsed building, where she had a good view of the battlefield. From there she could cover Drix and protect the civilians at the same time. Her weapon had limited ammunition in this scenario, which meant every shot had to count. Maya took her time and aimed for weak points in the Kryn armor that her training had taught her to recognize. The gaps between plates and the joints where movement required flexibility. She dropped 3 raiders before they figured out where she was shooting from. When they turned their attention toward her position, she relocated quickly and found another vantage point. Drix was bleeding simulated damage from multiple hits, but he was still fighting. The Corvin refused to fall back even when tactical sense said he should. Maya realized she would have to adapt her strategy to work with his stubborn nature rather than against it. She positioned herself so that Drix's aggressive pushes would drive the raiders into kill zones, where she could take them down efficiently. It was not the textbook approach, but it worked with the partner she had been given. The civilians were getting to the evacuation points in scattered groups. Maya noticed that one group was cut off by raiders who were moving to surround them. Drix was too engaged in his own fight to help. She made a split-second decision and jumped down from her position. She landed hard and felt the simulation suit register impact damage to her legs. Then she was running toward the cut-off civilians while firing at the raiders who were closing in on them. She reached the group just as the first raider attacked. Maya used her weapon as a club when the raider got too close for shooting, and felt the satisfying crunch of simulated impact. The other raiders turned toward her, which was exactly what she wanted. She led them away from the civilians and back toward where Drix was fighting. When the raiders realized they were caught between two defenders, they tried to retreat, but it was too late. Maya and Drix cut them down in a crossfire that left no survivors. The scenario lasted 32 minutes before the computer declared it complete. They had evacuated 70% of the civilians and eliminated 85% of the raiders. Drix had taken heavy damage and Maya had moderate injuries. The computer rated their performance as above average. In the observation deck, some of the watchers were starting to murmur with surprise. The human was not failing, and in fact she seemed to be doing better than expected. The third scenario was supposed to be the hardest, but Commander Vrel had decided to make it even more difficult without telling anyone. He accessed the simulation controls and loaded a scenario that was normally reserved for only the top cadets in their final year. Instead of the standard progression Maya and Drix found, themselves facing Vexor commandos who were elite, special forces from one of the most advanced military species in the galaxy. The simulation loaded them into a damaged space station that was drifting in orbit. Life support was failing, and they had limited ammunition, and multiple hostiles were hunting them through the dark corridors. The Vexor commandos were dangerous because they did not just fight with strength, but with intelligence and coordination that few species could match. They set traps and used advanced tactics, and they never made the same mistake twice. Drix wanted to fight them head-on like he had fought every other enemy. Maya tried to explain that this was different and they needed to be more careful, but Drix was frustrated from taking so much damage in the previous scenarios, and his Corvan pride would not let him hide from an enemy. He pushed forward aggressively and walked right into an ambush that the commandos had prepared. The Vexor hit them from 3 directions at once with overwhelming firepower. Drix went down in the first 10 seconds with his simulation suit registering fatal damage. The computer removed him from the scenario, which left Maya completely alone against 6 elite commandos in an environment that was actively trying to kill her. In the observation deck, the crowd expected Maya to surrender or die quickly. Even Lieutenant Kael thought the human was finished. But Maya did not surrender, and she did not die. She ran. She ran through corridors that normal cadets did not even know existed. The maintenance shafts and service tunnels that were too small for most species but perfect for a human. She crawled through ventilation systems and climbed access ladders that went up into the dark areas of the station, where emergency lights had failed. The Vexor commandos were better trained and better equipped, but they were hunting in an environment where those advantages meant less than they expected. Maya moved through the station like she had grown up in places like this. She found her way by touch when there was no light, and she remembered the layout after seeing it only once. She was not trying to win anymore because winning against 6 Vexor commandos was impossible. She was just trying to survive as long as possible and maybe take 1 or 2 of them with her if she got the chance. The first commando died in a maintenance shaft where the tight space negated all his tactical advantages. Maya waited in the dark until he crawled close enough, and then she used her knife, because firing a weapon in the enclosed space would have given away her position. The second commando fell to an improvised trap she made using emergency decompression protocols. She accessed a control panel and vented an entire section of the station into space when the commando was inside it. The other 4 commandos started to get more careful after that. They realized the human was not running in panic but hunting them the same way they were hunting her. They changed their tactics and tried to force her into areas where they could surround her, but Maya kept finding ways to slip past them or go around them, or simply wait them out in hiding spots where they could not find her. She ran out of ammunition after killing the 3rd commando in a firefight near the reactor core. The fight had been desperate and close range, and she had won by using the environment against him. The reactor was putting out radiation that disrupted their suit sensors, which meant they both had to rely on visual confirmation. Maya was smaller and faster, and she used those advantages to stay alive long enough to empty her weapon into the commando at point-blank range. Now she had a knife in her wits and 3 commandos who were getting angry. Angry opponents made mistakes, and Maya had learned a long time ago how to exploit mistakes. She led them on a chase through the station and used every trick she could think of to slow them down. She sealed bulkheads behind her and cut power to sections. They were moving through and even caused a small fire in one area that forced them to reroute. The fourth commando died when Maya dropped a heavy piece of equipment on him from above. She had been hiding in the ceiling crawlspace and waited for him to pass underneath. The impact did not kill him immediately, but it pinned him long enough for Maya to finish the job with her knife. 4 down and 2 to go, but she was exhausted and injured and running out of places to hide. The last 2 commandos cornered her in what had been the station's medical bay. There was no way out, and they knew it. Maya stood with her back to a wall and her knife in her hand and waited for them to make their move. She was breathing hard, and her simulation suit showed red damage indicators all over her body. But she did not surrender. The commandos came at her together, and Maya fought like someone who had nothing left to lose. She dodged the first attack and got inside the reach of the second commando's weapon. Her knife found the weak point under his arm where the armor did not cover, and he went down. The last commando hit her hard enough to crack ribs, but Maya held on and kept fighting. They went to the ground together, and it became a brutal close-quarters struggle that had nothing to do with training or tactics. It was just survival instinct against survival instinct. Maya won because she was willing to take more damage than the commando expected. She let him hurt her so she could get close enough to make the killing strike. When it was over, she lay on the floor of the medical bay, with the simulation declaring all hostiles eliminated. She had survived for 47 minutes against a scenario designed to last 15. Her suit was registering injuries that would have been fatal in real life. But in the simulation, she had barely held on long. The simulation ended, and Maya pulled off her helmet with shaking hands. She was covered in sweat, and her muscles were trembling from exhaustion. The pod opened, and she climbed out slowly because her legs did not want to support her weight anymore. Drix was already out of his pod, and he was staring at her with an expression she could not read. The entire training hall had gone completely silent. In the observation deck, chaos had erupted. Every screen was flashing red warning symbols, and alarms were going off that no one had heard before. Lieutenant Kale was standing at his console with all his eyes focused on the data streaming across the display. Commander Vrel was frozen in place with his crystalline face reflecting the red emergency lights in strange patterns. The other instructors were shouting questions and demanding to know what was happening. The assessment computer had finished processing Maya's performance data, and as part of standard protocol, it had run her biometric signature through the Galactic Threat Database. This database was ancient and comprehensive and contained information about every known species compiled over thousands of years of galactic history. It was maintained by artificial intelligence systems that the precursor civilization called the Ancients had left behind when they disappeared. The database had never been wrong. Maya's species profile loaded, and the results appeared on every screen in the observation deck. Species designation human, homeworld Earth, classification Death World Apex Predator, threat level extreme, tactical recommendation do not engage without overwhelming superiority. The words were displayed in the harsh red color that the database reserved for only the most dangerous entities in the galaxy. Lieutenant Kale started pulling up additional files, while the other instructors stood around in shock. What he found made him wish he had looked into this sooner. Earth was classified as a Category 12 death world, which meant it was one of the most hostile planets known to support intelligent life. The gravity was higher than most civilized worlds. The atmosphere had oxygen levels that would be toxic to many species in high concentrations. The planet had extreme weather, patterns and natural disasters and predators that had evolved alongside humans for millions of years. Humans themselves were persistence hunters, which meant they had evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. They could run for days without stopping. They could survive on minimal water and food. They healed from injuries that would cripple other species. Their bodies produced adrenaline that let them ignore pain and fight past the point where logic said they should give up. They had evolved dozens of different martial arts and combat systems over their history. They had fought wars that spanned continents and lasted generations. The evaluation team that had first contacted Earth 50 years ago had made a terrible mistake. They had visited during a rare period of peace and had seen the cities and the culture and the art. They had classified humans as peaceful and moderately advanced. They had never looked deeper into human history. They had never investigated what it took to survive on a planet that was actively trying to kill everything that lived on it. They had never understood that the peace they witnessed was not humanity's natural state, but something humans had fought desperately to achieve. Meanwhile, the Galactic Threat Database had done its job exactly as designed. When humans started appearing in galactic institutions, the database had automatically analyzed their biology and homeworld conditions. The conclusion was immediate and undeniable. Humans were apex predators from a death world and should be treated with extreme caution. But through a bureaucratic failure, this information had never been properly shared with the people who needed it most. The database was primarily used by military AI systems and tactical computers. Academy administrators and recruiters had never thought to check it. Admiral Torvik arrived at the observation deck within minutes of the alerts going out. He was an old Corvan who had commanded the Academy for 20 years and fought in 3 wars before that. He had seen combat against the worst threats the galaxy had to offer. He looked at the data on the screens and felt his blood go cold. They had been treating humans like weaklings. They had been mocking them and dismissing them and putting them in positions where they were expected to fail. And all along, humans had been classified as one of the most dangerous species in known space. Down in the training hall, Maya had no idea what was happening. She was trying to get her breathing under control and wondering if she had passed the assessment. Drix approached her slowly, and his tail was held low in a posture that meant respect or submission. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out at first. Finally, he managed to speak in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "You saved me in the first scenario," Drix said. "And the second?" "I did not see it at the time, but I reviewed the recordings while you were fighting alone. You positioned yourself to give me advantages. You covered my mistakes. You are a better warrior than I am." Maya was too tired to know how to respond to that. She just nodded and accepted the words because arguing seemed like it would take more energy than she had left. Other cadets were starting to gather around, but they kept their distance. They were looking at Maya differently now. The mockery was gone, and in its place was something that looked like fear. Admiral Torvik made an announcement over the station-wide communication system. All human personnel were to report to their quarters immediately. It was not a punishment, but a protective measure until the situation could be properly assessed. Maya was escorted to her small room by 2 security officers who treated her with careful courtesy. They would not tell her what was happening, and she was too exhausted to push for answers. Lieutenant Kale spent the next several hours going through combat records from every unit that had humans serving in them. What he found confirmed the database assessment. In boarding actions, humans had casualty rates that were 40% lower than other species. In long-duration operations, humans showed endurance that exceeded expectations by large margins. In crisis situations, humans remained functional when other species broke down. Every metric that mattered for combat effectiveness showed humans performing at or above the level of species that were considered superior. Warriors. There was a particular incident from 6 months ago during border skirmishes with Kryn raiders. A mixed unit of human Marines and Corvan shock troops had been deployed to defend a mining colony. The Corvans had taken heavy casualties as expected because Kryn were fierce opponents. But the humans had suffered minimal losses, and they had accounted for 60% of the confirmed enemy kills. The after-action report had attributed this to luck and good positioning. No one had considered that the humans might simply be better at combat than anyone realized. Admiral Torvik called an emergency meeting with all senior staff, and the conversation quickly became heated. Some instructors were angry that they had been made to look foolish. Others were frightened at the implications. A few, like Lieutenant Kale, were fascinated and wanted to learn more. Commander Vrel was silent, and his crystalline face showed no emotion, but everyone knew he was the one who had loaded the impossible scenario that exposed the truth. The Academy sent a priority message to Fleet Command explaining the situation. The response came back within hours, and it was not what anyone expected. Every human serving in the military was to be temporarily reassigned, while a complete review was conducted. This was not punishment, but procedure. When a species was reclassified at this level, everything had to be reevaluated. Training protocols and unit assignments and tactical doctrines all needed to be revised to account for the new information. On Earth, the news spread quickly through human communities. Representative Yenna, who had spent decades carefully building humanity's reputation in galactic politics, suddenly found herself dealing with a crisis she had never anticipated. Instead of convincing the galaxy that humans deserved respect, she now had to convince them that humans were not a threat. It was a strange reversal that she was not entirely sure how to handle. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session to address the situation. Representatives from dozens of species gathered to discuss what should be done about humanity. Some wanted humans removed from all military positions immediately. Others argued that humans had proven themselves trustworthy over 50 years of peaceful integration. The debate went on for hours while humans throughout the galaxy waited to learn their fate. Back at the academy, Maya finally got some answers when Lieutenant Kale came to visit her quarters. He explained everything that had happened and showed her the database classification. Maya read the words on his datapad and felt a strange mix of emotions. She had spent 3 years being told she was weak and inferior. Now she was learning that her species was classified as extreme threat level. It was validating in a way but also troubling because she did not want to be feared. Kyle explained that the situation was complicated. The database was never wrong about threat assessments, but that did not mean humans were actually dangerous. It just meant they had the capacity to be dangerous, which was very different. Every species had the capacity for violence. The question was whether they chose to use it responsibly. Humans had been part of galactic civilization for 50 years, and in that time the news about humanity's reclassification spread through the galaxy faster than anyone expected. Within 3 days, every major news network was running stories about the revelation. Some outlets treated it as a scandal and questioned how such a massive error could have gone unnoticed for 50 years. Others focused on the fear angle and ran sensationalized pieces about the hidden threat that had been living among civilized species. A few more responsible journalists tried to provide context and remind people that classification did not equal intention. Admiral Torvik spent those 3 days reviewing every piece of data he could find about human performance in military roles. He interviewed human officers and the aliens who served alongside them. He read after-action reports and medical files and psychological evaluations. The picture that emerged was complicated but ultimately reassuring. Humans were capable warriors, but they were also disciplined and followed orders and showed strong moral frameworks. They were dangerous when they needed to be, but they were not mindlessly aggressive. One interview particularly stuck with Torvik. He spoke with Captain Kate Sullivan, who commanded the Marine detachment on a destroyer called Valiant Wind. She had served for 8 years alongside Corvin and Vexian troops. When Torvik asked if she had known about the database classification, she laughed and said no, but it explained a lot. She had always wondered why the Corvins seemed so surprised when humans kept fighting after taking hits that would drop a Corvin warrior, or why the Vexians were impressed that humans could march for days with minimal rest and food. "We thought we were just keeping up with everyone else," Captain Sullivan explained. "We pushed ourselves hard because we did not want to be seen as weak. Turns out we were exceeding expectations we did not even know existed. The Corvins would take a hit and go down, and we would take the same hit and keep moving, because that is what we were trained to do. We thought they were being tactical. They thought we were being superhuman." Torvik asked if the reclassification changed how Sullivan saw herself or her role. She thought about it for a moment and then shook her head. "No, sir," she said. "I am still the same person I was before. My capabilities have not changed. The only thing that changed is how other people perceive those capabilities. I would rather be respected for what I can do than dismissed for what people assumed I could not do. If respect comes with a side of fear, then I can live with that." The Galactic Council's debate continued for days, and the arguments went in circles. The Zenthari delegation insisted that any species classified as apex predators should be restricted from military service. The Vexian delegation countered that capability without hostile intent was not grounds for discrimination. The Corvin delegation was divided because some Corvins felt insulted that they had been looking down on superior warriors, while others were pragmatic enough to recognize that having humans as allies was better than having them as enemies. Representative Yenna addressed the council on the 4th day, and her speech was broadcast across the galaxy. She spoke calmly and directly without trying to minimize what humans were or what they were capable of. Yes, humans came from a harsh world. Yes, they had evolved traits that made them effective in combat, but they had also evolved intelligence and empathy, and a strong drive to protect rather than destroy. Human history was full of conflict, but it was also full of cooperation and art and philosophy and an endless desire to improve and grow. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times before we reached the stars, Yenna told the council. We learned through terrible cost that strength without wisdom leads only to ruin. We do not seek to dominate anyone. We seek to belong. We have spent 50 years proving that we can be trusted. This reclassification does not change who we are. It only changes how you see us. The question is whether you will judge us by our actions or by your fears. While the council debated, Admiral Torvik made a decision that would prove more influential than any political speech. He announced that the Academy would conduct a demonstration to gather objective data about human combat capabilities. He would pit the Academy's best cadets against a team of average humans in complex scenarios. Not to humiliate anyone, but to understand the truth. The demonstration would be observed by military officials from multiple species, and the results would be made public. Maya was asked to assemble the human team. She was careful in her choices. She did not pick the most aggressive or combat-focused humans at the Academy. Instead, she chose people who represented a cross-section of what humanity could do. Jake Morrison had been an emergency medical technician on Earth before joining the fleet. Linda Carter was an engineer who had barely passed the physical requirements. Peter Quinn worked in logistics and had no combat experience beyond basic training. They were not elite warriors. They were just regular humans. The opposing team consisted of 15 cadets who were ranked in the top 20 of their class. 5 Corvins, including Drix, who had volunteered despite his friendship with Maya. 5 Xanthari who wanted to prove their superiority. 4 Vexians who approached it as a tactical exercise. And 1 Kryn named Thrax who had defected from the Raiders years ago and knew more about real combat than most of the instructors. The scenario was designed to be as realistic as possible. A colony under siege with civilians to evacuate and hostile forces to repel. The human team would be outnumbered 3-1 and given inferior equipment. If humans really were as dangerous as the database claimed, they should still perform well. If the classification was exaggerated, then the demonstration would prove it. The observation deck was more crowded than it had ever been. Every instructor and senior officer from 3 nearby stations had come to watch. Representative Yenna had arrived via priority transport. Even some council members were observing remotely through secure channels. Everyone wanted to see if humans really deserved their fearsome reputation. The simulation began and both teams materialized in the colony. The alien cadets moved with textbook precision and applied tactics that had been proven in countless real battles across galactic history. They advanced in coordinated groups and established firing positions, and began systematically clearing the colony of hostiles while securing civilians. It was efficient and professional, and exactly what their training had taught them to do. The humans did something different. Jake Morrison organized the civilians into groups and gave them tasks that turned panic into purpose. Linda Carter accessed the colony's building management systems and started manipulating environmental controls to create obstacles and advantages. Peter Quinn studied the alien cadets' movement patterns and predicted where they would go next with uncanny accuracy. Maya coordinated everything and turned the colony into a chessboard where every piece was working together. The alien cadets advanced confidently into what looked like an undefended sector. They walked into a trap that Linda had constructed using nothing but the colony's own fire suppression and ventilation systems. Foam flooded the streets and reduced visibility to near zero. The humans attacked from positions the aliens had not considered and eliminated the first team before they could recover from the surprise. The second team adjusted their tactics and moved more carefully. Peter Quinn had predicted the adjustment, and the humans were already repositioning to counter it. The aliens found themselves herded into kill zones without realizing they were being manipulated. When they tried to fall back, they discovered their retreat routes had been cut off by collapsed buildings and sealed doors. Maya's team was not just fighting. They were reshaping the entire battlefield to suit their needs. Thrax, the Kryn warrior, watched the battle with growing recognition. He had fought against humans before during his time with the Raiders. His people had learned to avoid human colonies not out of mercy, but out of survival instinct. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not accept the rules of engagement that everyone else followed. They adapted and improvised and turned every disadvantage into a potential weapon. He tried to warn his teammates, but they were too committed to their assault to listen. The alien cadets had superior training and better equipment and greater numbers. But the humans had something else. They had grown up on a planet that tried to kill them in 1,000 different ways. They had evolved to see threats everywhere and find solutions in impossible situations. They did not fight fair because fair was a luxury their ancestors could never afford. They fought to win, and winning meant using every tool and trick and advantage they could create. At the 30-minute mark, the alien third team broke. Their casualties were too high and their morale was shattered. At 45 minutes, the remaining aliens were scattered and disorganized. At 1 hour, the simulation ended with the humans having evacuated all civilians and eliminated or neutralized 70% of the hostile forces. The human team had taken 0 fatal casualties. The observation deck was silent. Then Admiral Torvik began to clap, and the sound echoed through the space like thunder. One by one, others joined him. It was not mockery this time. It was respect born from seeing the truth with their own eyes. The database had been right. Humans were apex predators, but they were also intelligent and creative and cooperative. They were dangerous, but they were not monsters. The demonstration changed everything. Within 24 hours, the Galactic Council voted to officially recognize humanity's reclassification, while also confirming their status as full members of galactic civilization. The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The message was clear. Humans were dangerous, but they were also valuable allies, who had earned their place among the stars through 50 years of peaceful cooperation. New directives went out to every military and civilian organization in the galaxy. Training protocols were revised to account for human capabilities. Where humans had previously been given lighter duties, they were now assigned to specialized roles where their unique traits offered advantages. Long-duration patrols in hostile environments. Boarding actions where adaptability mattered more than raw strength. Search and rescue operations in extreme conditions. Counterinsurgency operations where understanding human psychology gave them insights into how other species might think. The term Earthborn took on new meaning throughout the galaxy. It was no longer said with contempt, but with a mixture of respect and caution. Everyone now understood that humans came from a world that had forged them in ways few other species could comprehend. They were survivors who refused to give up. They were problem solvers who saw opportunities where others saw only obstacles. They were warriors who fought with both courage and intelligence. Maya graduated at the top of her class alongside Drix, who had become her closest friend. The ceremony was different from previous years, because now everyone understood what it meant when a human earned their commission. Admiral Torvik personally presented Maya with her rank insignia and told her that she had done more than pass an assessment. She had opened the galaxy's eyes to a truth they had been too blind to see. Maya and Drix were both assigned to the heavy cruiser Vigilant, which was one of the premier ships in the fleet. The captain was a Vexian named Zara, who had specifically requested them both after reviewing their academy records. Zara had fought in the border wars, and she understood the value of having warriors who could adapt to any situation. She welcomed Maya and Drix aboard and told them she expected great things from both of them. The Vigilance crew was diverse with representatives from a dozen different species. The initial reaction to having a human aboard was mixed. Some crew members were curious and wanted to learn more about Earth and its people. Others were nervous and kept their distance. But Maya had dealt with prejudice for 3 years, and she knew how to handle it. She did her job well and treated everyone with respect and let her actions speak for themselves. The first real test came 3 months into their deployment. The Vigilant was patrolling a disputed border region when they received a distress call from a civilian transport that was under attack by pirates. The pirates were using hit-and-run tactics, and they had already disabled the transport's engines. Captain Zara ordered a boarding action to secure the transport and drive off the attackers. Drix led the boarding team with Maya as his second in command. They took a mixed squad of Corvan Marines and human specialists. The transport was a maze of corridors and cargo holds that provided endless opportunities for ambush. The pirates were dug in deep and fighting desperately because they knew capture meant life imprisonment. Drix wanted to use standard Corvan tactics and push through with overwhelming force. Maya suggested a different approach. She had studied the transport's layout during the approach and identified alternate routes that the pirates probably were not watching. If they split their forces and came at the pirates from unexpected directions, they could catch them in a crossfire. Drix trusted Maya enough now to take her advice. The plan worked better than anyone expected. The pirates were so focused on defending the main approaches that they never saw the flanking attacks coming. Maya's team came through maintenance tunnels and cargo lifts, and suddenly the pirates found themselves surrounded. Most surrendered immediately when they realized they had no way out. The few who tried to fight were quickly overwhelmed. The entire operation took less than 20 minutes and resulted in 0 friendly casualties. Captain Zara commended both Maya and Drix in her official report. She noted that the success was due to their ability to combine Corvan strength with human adaptability. It was exactly the kind of cooperation that the new protocols were designed to encourage. The report was read by fleet commanders who started looking for other opportunities to use mixed species teams in similar ways. Over the following year, the Vigilant saw action in a dozen different situations. Each time Maya proved that her Academy performance had not been a fluke. She could move through damaged ships in 0 gravity better than most species. She could endure long patrols with minimal rest. She could think clearly in crisis situations when others were overwhelmed by stress. And most importantly, she could work effectively with alien crew members who had initially been skeptical of her. Drix watched Maya's success with pride rather than jealousy. Their partnership had evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect. He told her once that working with her had made him a better warrior because she forced him to think beyond the traditional Corvan approaches. She replied that working with him had taught her that strength and adaptability were not opposites but could complement each other when used correctly. Back on Earth, the reclassification had sparked intense discussions about humanity's place in the galaxy. Some people were proud that their species was recognized as formidable. Others worried that the fearsome reputation would lead to isolation or conflict. But most people just continued living their lives and hoped that their representatives would make wise decisions. Representative Yenna worked tirelessly to ensure that humanity's reclassification did not become a source of fear, but rather of understanding. She gave speeches and wrote articles and met with leaders from dozens of species. Her message was consistent. Humans were what their world had made them. They did not choose to be apex predators any more than a Xanthari chose to be crystalline. What mattered was not the classification, but the choices humans made with their capabilities. The Galactic Council established new cultural exchange programs to help other species understand Earth and its history. Students from across the galaxy visited Earth to see the death world conditions that had shaped humanity. They walked through nature preserves and saw the predators that humans had once competed against. They visited museums and learned about the wars and disasters and extinctions that humanity had survived. They came away with a deeper appreciation for why humans were the way they were. In return, humans visited other worlds and learned about species who had evolved in gentler conditions. They saw crystalline gardens on Xanthar, where the Xanthari grew in peaceful meditation. They witnessed the ancient war colleges on Corva, where warriors trained in traditions spanning millennia. They experienced the logic temples on Vexia, where pure reason was pursued as the highest form of art. Humans learned that strength came in many forms and that their way was not the only way. 5 years after Maya's graduation, the Vigilant was assigned to a joint task force dealing with a major Kryn incursion. The raiders had grown bold and were attacking colony worlds in coordinated strikes that suggested a new level of organization. The task force included ships from 6 different species and would be the largest military operation since the border wars. Maya had been promoted to lieutenant and now commanded her own boarding team. Drix had also advanced and led a company of Corvan Marines. They worked together to train their combined forces in tactics that used the best of both approaches. The humans taught the Corvans about adaptability and improvisation. The Corvans taught the humans about courage and honor. Both sides learned that they were stronger together than apart. The battle against the Kryn lasted for 3 weeks and involved dozens of engagements across multiple star systems. The task force took casualties, but they pushed the raiders back and destroyed their main staging bases. In the final assault on the Kryn command ship, Maya's team led the boarding action that captured the raider leadership. The Kryn commander was a massive warrior who had terrorized the border regions for decades. He surrendered to Maya without a fight because he recognized in her the same predator instinct that his own species possessed. After the battle, Admiral Torvik, who now commanded the entire task force, called Maya to his flagship. He told her that she had exceeded every expectation and brought honor to both humanity and the fleet. He offered her a position on his staff, which would mean leaving the Vigilant, but would also open doors for future advancement. Maya thanked him but declined. She wanted to stay with her ship and her crew because that was where she felt she belonged. Torvik understood and respected her decision. Before she left, he told her something that stayed with her for the rest of her career. He said that when he first learned about humanity's reclassification, He had been angry at the mistakes that had been made, but now he realized those mistakes had led to something valuable. Humans had proven themselves without special treatment or lowered expectations. They had earned respect through their actions rather than through fear. That was worth more than any database classification. Maya returned to the Vigilant and found her crew waiting to celebrate the victory. Humans in Corvinson